Lady Evelyne gave birth to a stillborn son. Then soon after, her husband vanished while staying at the Wrotham manor. The villagers whispered that she had sent him, a way to keep him from inheriting her cursed bloodline. But Evelyne refused to let grief consume her. She would have an heir, she decided, and she would raise that child to be perfect. 2 years later, she gave birth to a baby boy, and she doted on him, surrounding him with the finest silks and jewels, bathing him in sunlight and song. But her doting bordered on obsession, and the townspeople noticed. They watched her playing with the child in the gardens, and they saw the wild gleam in her eye and the blood on her hands. When she sang to her son, she cradled him close, her gloved hands never leaving his skin. And the villagers shuddered at the lyrics she chose, songs about lost loves and bloody sacrifices. Soon they stopped visiting, for a mother's love can turn feral if given reason. And the villagers had given her more than one. In 1879, a gamekeeper stumbled upon the mangled corpse of a cat, its limbs broken, its eyes picked out, its throat torn open as if by some monstrous beak. A week later, the gardener's dog was found dead, its fur torn and matted, its bones gnawed clean. Then the sheep began disappearing from the meadows, their bodies found drained of blood and twisted into impossible shapes. Fear turned to certainty when young Thomas Brewer, who dared mock the lady, was found dead in the lake, his skinless bones arranged on the shore like morbid flotsam. The villagers were terrified. Whispers turned to screams. Was there a beast in the manor? Had Evelyne unleashed some ancient evil? Then Lady Evelyne began appearing at the village functions, her gaunt face whiter than ever, her eyes dark pools of ink. She told the villagers that she was sorry for what had happened. And every time she reached out a hand to touch someone's arm or stroke a child's hair, they recoiled as if burned.
Oh.
For they saw not a grieving widow, but a predator bearing her fangs. No one knows what drove them over the edge, but one night the villagers took their pitchforks and stormed the manor. They smashed the greenhouse, overturned the flower beds, then burst into the house. They found Evelyne kneeling in front of the fireplace, chanting and tearing at her silk stockings. Beside her lay a small figure wrapped in a blanket. As they approached, the chanting stopped. She turned, and they saw the devilish gleam in her eyes, the blood on her bare arms. With a scream, she flung the blanket off the child. He was taken, she screamed. The beast took him. Must help me bind it. The villagers hesitated, unsure if she was mad, sane, human, or monster. Then they looked down at the child and saw the truth. It wasn't a blanket. It was a shroud. The boy was already dead. That's all the time we have for tonight's episode. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this tale of terror, please show your support. Until next time, sleep tight and don't let the nightmares bite. The Legend of Lady Evelyne, the Ghost of Wrotham House. In 1869, Lady Evelyne gave birth to a son, Francis, a small boy, delicate and unusually quiet. From the moment he arrived, Evelyne refused to allow any nursemaids near him. She insisted on feeding him herself, bathing him, teaching him scripture by candlelight, even rocking him to sleep while humming lullabies in a language no one could identify. Lord Bramble protested at first, but quickly withdrew. He had grown pale and gaunt in recent months, as though the house itself were feeding on his strength. One evening, a maid named Clara was caught peering through the nursery keyhole. She was dismissed the next day, trembling and silent. Years later, drunk and half-starved in a workhouse, she would mutter of the strange sight she saw: a cradle surrounded by salt, a circle drawn in ash, and Lady Evelyne standing above it with her arms outstretched, whispering something to the ceiling. Something that wasn't English. When Francis turned 5, he vanished. The official story was that he had fallen into the river that bordered their estate. No body was ever recovered. No cries were heard. Only a single tiny shoe was found resting in the reeds like an offering. Lady Evelyne went into mourning but did not wear black. She wore ivory, always ivory. Her staff reported that she kept the nursery untouched, as though expecting him to return. Sometimes they heard her talking to someone inside. But when they opened the door, she would be alone, sitting in the rocking chair, smiling faintly. Lord Bramble left the house one stormy night and was never seen again. His carriage was found toppled near the cliffs, the driver's body missing its head. As for Evelyne, she remained alone, reclusive, yet somehow more radiant than ever. The years did not seem to touch her. Her skin remained porcelain, her eyes bright, her voice colder. Visitors began to avoid the manor altogether. Deliverymen left parcels at the gate. Letters piled up unopened. But one man did, come the Reverend Horace Dunley. He was an aging clergyman who had known Lord Bramble in his youth and had grown suspicious of the rumors. In 1871 he demanded an audience with Lady Evelyne. What he found within those walls would never be written down. But he emerged days later, wild-eyed, his hands trembling as though chilled from within. He retired from the clergy immediately, took a vow of silence, and spent his final years scratching symbols into the walls of his cottage until they found him hanging in his parlor, his tongue black and his mouth full of dirt. They say the house is still there. Some say if you listen very carefully, you can hear the faint sound of a rocking chair on the wind. Or perhaps it's just the wind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. The Wrotham Manor remained shuttered for decades, overtaken by ivy and silence. Those who dared enter never stayed long. Contractors complained of sudden nosebleeds, vanishing tools, and an overwhelming smell of iron in the west wing. One laborer swore he heard a child crying behind the nursery walls, though the room had been stripped bare for years. After that, no one returned. In 1893, a peculiar man named Dr. Lionel Merrick arrived in Wiltshire. A self-proclaimed historian of domestic hysteria and post-mortem phenomena, Merrick was drawn not to palaces or battlefields, but to houses that breathed sorrow. He had heard whispers of the Wrotham estate through letters passed among secret societies. And one particular detail intrigued him: the ivory dress. Lady Evelyne had been last seen wearing it in 1887, seated motionless on the balcony, gazing into the woods. Her skin pale, untouched by age, her hair a smooth raven black. She hadn't opened the gate in decades, so who had been keeping her alive? Dr. Merrick gained access to the estate through legal manipulation and coin. He came alone, carrying only notebooks, vials of chalk, and a peculiar amulet made of bone, which he claimed was a protection against ancestral possession. Locals warned him not to enter. They told him of the singing, the shadows with eyes, the cold spots that followed you home. He did not listen. He spent 5 nights inside. On the 6th, he emerged gaunt and gray, dragging behind him a torn canvas sack filled with bones, journals, and something else wrapped in velvet. He refused to speak to anyone, but mailed his findings to a private archive in Edinburgh, sealed, restricted and marked with a single line in Latin: Vera mors est, illique mene in luce. The true death is the one that remains in light. His journals, later leaked by an assistant, revealed what he found. Behind the nursery wall was a hollow, sealed space no more than a meter wide. Inside it, the skeleton of a small child sat upright, draped in ceremonial linens, its eye sockets filled with pearls. Around its neck a Evelyne's wedding pendant, beneath the bones, stitched into the very fabric of the floorboards. A diary bound in human skin. The writing inside was unmistakably Evelyne's. The ink was faded, but the madness remained fresh. She wrote of voices not from within, but above voices that guided her since childhood. She spoke of purity, not of the soul, but of the vessel. That the soul must be returned uncorrupted, and the body must become the key. She described rituals older than Scripture, whispered to her by a white-eyed woman in the mirror, and she described how she had cleansed her son. What the hell? This case is horrifying. If I ever see that woman, I'm staying the hell away from her. In 1889, a young woman named Evelyn Dunbar gave birth to her first child, Francis. The pregnancy and delivery were difficult, and by the following day, both mother and child were very ill. Evelyn cared for Francis as best she could, but she was desperate for help. So she turned to her friend, Thomas Merrick, who arrived at their home in Yorkshire to find the baby listless and barely clinging to life. Without hesitation, she bathed him in milk, anointed him with crushed laudanum and clove oil, and held him as he slipped away in her arms, smiling, peaceful. Then she spoke of what came next, of the soft warmth, the final breath, and of how she could not allow such purity to rot in the earth, that to preserve the light within him, it had to be consumed. I took the first piece with trembling reverence, she wrote, not in hunger, not in grief, but in awe, for in that moment I tasted God. From then on, the entries descended into a sort of theological delirium. She believed herself chosen, that by consuming Francis, she had absorbed his untainted soul, sheltering it from decay. She began fasting, only drinking rainwater and salt. She no longer bled. She no longer aged. She claimed her reflection began to speak back, sometimes gently, sometimes cruelly. There was one passage, however, that Merrick found particularly disturbing. It read, "He speaks to me now from the walls. My son, still whole within me. When I sleep, he dreams. When I cry, he quiets me. I have become his cathedral." According to Merrick, the body in the wall had not decayed. Despite being buried for nearly 30 years, it was dry, preserved its mouth locked in a faint smile. Some said it wasn't natural. Others said it wasn't dead. Merrick attempted to remove the body for study but failed. His journal ended abruptly with a sketchy symbol drawn in ash, an eye inside a cradle, surrounded by thorns. He disappeared that same year during a voyage to Iceland. His boat was found adrift, empty, save for his coat. Inside its pocket, a single pearl. In the years that followed, the house was officially condemned. But certain individuals, occultists, thrill-seekers, even clergymen continued to break in. Most found nothing but dust and silence. But a few left behind fragments, a blood-soaked glove, a child's rattle warm to the touch. One man emerged with a grin he could not remove. He laughed until his jaw broke. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came in 1904. When a group of schoolboys dared one another to spend a night inside, they entered with torches and whiskey. They did not all return. One named Peter Langham was found wandering the moors 3 days later, his fingernails torn off, whispering Evelyne's lullaby. When asked what happened, he said, "She's still singing. She never stopped, and he's still hungry." Here's something interesting from that day. On the floor above us, the second story, there are the remains of 4 rooms. But when we walked up the stairs, we could only find 3 doors. We tried all the obvious, even desperate measures to get inside, but nothing worked. So we gave up and sat in the next room, which was full of trash, old furniture, all the debris of a long-dead house. And then we heard it, a scratching sound, just beyond our hearing, like the slow movement of something large and heavy, dragging itself closer and closer. And the door in front of us, slowly, inexorably, began to open. I thought it was the end of the world. I'd come to see the ruin of a house, not the return of the damned. I backed away from the door, watching as it swung open wider and wider. There was nothing behind it, no room, only blackness. I stepped into it and fell. I fell for what seemed like hours through a tunnel of pitch-black nothing. Then suddenly I was falling through a different kind of darkness, like being submerged in a pool of thick oil. The darkness was warm. It smelled like lavender and damp earth. My foot hit the floor and I stumbled forward onto solid ground. Dim oil lamplight flickered around me, revealing a circular room, bare except for a single chest in the center. I approached it cautiously, half expecting it to spring shut as if alive, but it didn't move. There was something about its stillness that unsettled me. I knew I shouldn't open it. Whatever had been trapped in that room wanted to stay trapped, but I couldn't help myself. As I lifted the lid, something brushed against my hand, cold and damp like a grave. I pulled it out, beautifully crafted with porcelain skin and hair of spun gold. But its face was blank, its eyes sockets empty. And then it started to move. I threw it down and ran for the door, stumbling blindly through the darkness. When I finally found it and burst through into the daylight, I was shaking. I could hear the others calling me from below. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, deeper and deeper into the woods. Away from the sound of their voices and the feeling of the doll's cold, dead eyes on my back. What's the most terrifying sound you've ever heard? For me, it's fingernails on a chalkboard. How about you? In the comments below, share your thoughts because some sounds are more terrifying than others. It's like the sound of a lullaby sung in a language that shouldn't exist. You see, in 1963, a man named John Howways moved into Wrotham Manor in Kent, England. It looked like your typical stately home, all but one room. He wrote of a house that seemed far larger inside than it should be, of a dining hall with no ceiling, of a staircase that led nowhere but always descended. But most disturbingly, he described hearing a lullaby in the dark. Not in English, not in German. but in a language that made his ears bleed and his mind slip sideways. "She is still here," he wrote, "and she is still feeding." The final page of the journal was a single sentence, written over and over in frantic childlike scrawl. "I didn't mean to be impure." In 1965, the British government quietly acquired the land and declared it unsafe. Officially, they cited unexploded ordnance and ground instability. But those who lived nearby saw trucks arriving at night. Men in white suits entering the manor, carrying briefcases and Geiger counters. They were seen leaving without them. Soon after, the earth behind the estate cracked open in what geologists called an unexplained subsidence event. A sinkhole, they said. But no one found a bottom. Just layers and layers of bone, charred wood, and a staircase that led deeper than the ground should have allowed. Then came the recordings. In 1972, audio engineer named Wallace Blythe, fascinated by old legends, snuck into the ruins with a reel-to-reel recorder. What he captured that night remains one of the most debated sound documents in modern paranormal research. The tape begins with static, then silence, then ... a voice. Soft, female, British, singing, but the words don't match any known language. Linguists have tried to analyze the phonetics, but the sounds seem to mimic human speech while subtly breaking every rule of it, and layered beneath the voice is something else. Second voice. Smaller, thinner, crying, not in fear, but in rhythm. A duet, mother and child. The tape ends with a whisper. "We are still one." Blythe went deaf in both ears the day after playback. No physical trauma. No illness, just silence. He described it not as loss, but as a mercy. When asked why, he wept and wrote only this on a scrap of paper: "Because now I can no longer hear him crawling." To this day, that recording has never been played in full on public radio. Every broadcast attempt results in signal interference or blackouts. The original reel remains stored in a lead-lined safe at an undisclosed university archive, labeled simply "Wrotham Lullaby, Do Not Play." Now, I don't know about you, but that sure as hell sounded like a threat to me. So if you're brave enough, I dare you to search for the forbidden recording. See if you can find it. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more scary stories. In the early 1990s, Wrotham Manor was quietly erased from public records. No postal code, no deeds. It became what modern bureaucrats call a non-existent parcel. But legends, like ghosts, don't die when ignored. They multiply in silence. In 1997, a student filmmaker named Beatrice Holloway took it upon herself to document the lingering whispers surrounding the house. Her thesis project, titled "The House Evelyne Built," is intended to debunk myths through interviews and urban exploration. But what began as skepticism quickly spiraled into obsession. Beatrice spent 6 months tracing every known incident tied to the estate, from Merrick's vanished journals to the restricted audio tapes, even interviewing the daughter of one of the spiritualists who survived, the Ijo Rye. "My mother," the woman said, "lost more than her mind in that place. She lost her shadow. For years she cast none in sunlight." Beatrice and her crew disappeared during filming in February 1998. All that remained was their van, parked half a mile from the overgrown estate, engine still warm. Inside were cameras, bags, and a small box filled with white gloves, salt, and a pocket Bible whose pages had been shredded into tiny crosses. Weeks later, a hiker discovered a single tape wedged in the hollow of a dead tree. It bore no label, just a circle drawn in black ink, inside of which was a crude drawing of an eye. Authorities reviewed the footage but refused to release it publicly. However, transcripts from the initial review panel leaked years later. They describe a dimly lit interior walls pulsing slightly, as though breathing. Whispers in the static. The camera turns toward a hallway where a pale figure stands motionless, cradling something that wriggles. The tape ends abruptly. The last frame shows a door. On it, written in what appeared to be blood, were the words, "He sleeps inside her still." The case was closed as a hoax, officially. But there were anomalies. When they found the bones in that house, there was a single room, untouched by the decay, the nursery. The rocking horse was still there. The toys were strewn about. On the floor they found a diary. It belonged to the lead inspector. He began sleepwalking. Often he would wake up on the roof of his own home with his hands clutched tight as though holding an infant. Then he would write, entranced, about a face in the attic, a face that was not his. Then he would wake up in the middle of the night and pace the floor, muttering about a second face, smaller, backwards, pressed into the first like a mask. They also found a diary belonging to one of the technicians, who gouged out her own eyes. After she saw that second face, she said it looked like a child wearing a nightshirt. She described how she felt its icy fingers on her own, how it stared at her with an alien light in its sockets. And then she wrote, "I am the light in the socket. I am the socket in the light. I am the darkness between the eyes." Even now, some corners of the internet say that if you stare long enough at a still frame from that video, you will hear the lullaby, not through speakers, but in your head, faint from behind your skull. In 1988, a journalist visited the site. Wrotham Manor is nothing but ruins now. The roof has collapsed. The gardens are strangled by thorns. But the nursery window remains intact, untouched by wind or weather, always shut. And if you approach it, if you're foolish enough to stand in the dying light of that broken place, you might see movement inside, a slow rocking motion, a sliver of white lace, a finger brushing glass. Some say the house breathes. Others believe it dreams. But the most unsettling belief, whispered only by the oldest locals, is this: that Evelyne was right, that her ritual, her consumption, was not madness, but preservation, and that her son lives on, not as flesh, not as ghost, but as a song trapped in bone. A priest once theorized that the house itself had become a reliquary, a cathedral built not of stone and stained glass, but of maternal grief and spiritual hunger. That Lady Evelyne, in her twisted devotion, created something eternal, not quite dead, not quite divine. In 2012, a drone passed over the estate during a wildlife survey. One frame, buried deep in the raw footage, showed something peculiar: the outline of a woman standing amid the debris. She appeared to be cradling a child. Both were looking directly at the camera, but here's the detail that most overlook. The drone made no sound, and yet its internal audio sensors picked up a faint pattern. Inhale, exhale, inhale, like a cradle slowly swinging. So if you ever hear a lullaby in the dark, one you don't recognize, one that feels older than language, don't follow it. Don't hum along. Don't look in the mirror while it plays. And above all, never answer when it sings your name.